6:47 a.m. The bolt cutters screech through the padlock on my grandfather's 200-year-old barn, the sweetest sound I've heard in months, because I knew Vivian Caldwell, HOA tyrant, had just walked straight into the trap I'd been setting for 6 months. From my kitchen window, steam fogs the glass, coffee grows cold in my grip. 3 goons in property enforcement polos slice through my chain like they own my family's bloodline. The morning air carries dew on old wood mixed with the sharp bite of cut metal. What they can't see, Sheriff Martinez crouched in the shadows behind those barn doors, radio in one hand, cuffs in the other, body cam rolling every felony second. 30 seconds later, the sound echoing from that barn isn't hammering or sawing. It's pure panic. 3 grown men, realizing they just committed breaking and entering in front of a county sheriff who's been documenting their every move. Vivian thought she could bully a 58-year-old veteran off his family's legacy. She thought wrong. Dead wrong. Your HOA trying to steal your family's ground? Drop your revenge plan in city below, because this story's just getting started. My name's Dale Thornfield, and at 58, I thought I'd seen every kind of petty tyrant there was. 30 years as a machinist, dealing with foremen who thought a clipboard made them God. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for Vivian Caldwell and her leather portfolio of doom. This whole mess started when I inherited my grandfather's 3-acre property in what used to be the quiet outskirts of town. The old man built half this place back in the 1940s, but the barn, that's been standing since 1823. 200 years of Thornfield sweat and sawdust live in those hand-hewn beams. The smell of aged oak and motor oil still hangs in the air, mixed with decades of woodworking projects and the faint ghost of my grandfather's Lucky Strike cigarettes. 4 generations of tools hang on those walls like a museum of honest work. My grandfather taught me to use his father's hand planes in that barn. I taught my nephew on the same workbench, scarred by a century of projects. That building isn't just lumber and nails. It's our family's DNA, our connection to men who built things to last forever. But then Meadowbrook Estates sprouted up around us like mushrooms after rain. McMansions with 3-car garages and perfectly manicured lawns that look like green carpet samples. The HOA formed 3 years ago when the developer sold his final lots, and most neighbors were decent enough. City folks looking for space to breathe and maybe grow some tomatoes. Then Vivian Caldwell moved in 2 years ago, and everything went to hell. Picture this: a 52-year-old woman who treats her white Lexus SUV like a mobile command center, always carrying that leather portfolio like it contains nuclear launch codes. The woman measures grass height with an actual ruler. I've watched her do it at 6 a.m. on Sunday mornings, crouched on someone's lawn in a business suit like she's investigating a crime scene. The crunch of her heels on gravel announces her arrival from 2 blocks away. Her first official visit came with a certified letter that made my coffee taste like battery acid. The barn, my grandfather's barn, apparently violated aesthetic standards for the neighborhood. Never mind that it was built when her great-grandmother was learning to walk. The HOA wanted it gone in 60 days, or I'd face $500 a day fines. Standing on my front porch in her power suit, Vivian made 8 references to property values in 10 minutes, I counted. But it was the other comment that showed her true colors. We're trying to maintain a certain standard here. Certain types of people understand the vision we're building. She said it while eyeing my work boots and paint-stained jeans, her nose wrinkled like she'd stepped in something unpleasant. The sweet smell of honeysuckle from my grandmother's vine couldn't quite mask the stench of that particular brand of polite discrimination. Rex down at the hardware store pulled me aside after Vivian's inspection tour. "She's been asking questions about your property for months," he said, his weathered hands restocking bolts with the efficiency of 40 years' practice. Something about property records and development potential, and Dale, her husband, works for Meridian Development, the company that's been buying up farmland east of town. That night, digging through my grandfather's papers by lamplight, the musty smell of old documents filled my kitchen. The original deed showed the barn predated any neighborhood restrictions by 2 centuries. There had to be protections, grandfather clauses, something that would stop this madness. But while I researched property law until my eyes burned, Vivian escalated her campaign. Daily inspections became her new routine. Driving by at different times, photographing my barn from every angle like she was planning a military operation, which it turned out she was. The stage was set for the kind of David versus Goliath battle that would either save my family's legacy or destroy everything my grandfather built with his own hands. 2 weeks after that first threatening letter, Vivian filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office. Not just any complaint, a 47-page masterpiece of manufactured outrage that would make a conspiracy theorist proud. Photos, soil samples, and what she claimed was a professional engineering assessment. The woman had apparently spent more on fake documentation than most people spend on their cars. The complaint painted my barn like it was the Leaning Tower of Pisa crossed with a toxic waste dump. Structural hazard attracts rodents and potentially dangerous wildlife, she wrote. She even submitted soil samples suggesting contamination, though where she got dirt that tested positive for motor oil on a property that's never seen anything heavier than my grandfather's 1952 Ford tractor, I'll never know. But here's where Vivian showed her true colors. She scheduled a surprise county inspection without notifying me. In her world, apparently, property owners don't deserve the courtesy of advance warning when bureaucrats come sniffing around their land. Lucky for me, Mrs. Ivy called at 7 a.m. while I was nursing my first cup of coffee. Dale, there's a county truck in your driveway and some official-looking guy poking around your barn with measuring equipment. The bitter taste of panic mixed with Colombian dark roast. Not a pleasant combination. I threw on yesterday's jeans and jogged outside to find Inspector Mike Rodriguez examining my barn's foundation. Middle-aged guy with calloused hands and the methodical approach of someone who actually knew construction from the ground up. He was tapping the massive oak support beams with a small hammer, listening to that solid thunk you only get from properly seasoned 2-century-old timber. "You the owner?" he asked, squinting at his laser level. "Dale Thornfield. This barn's been in my family since before your great-grandfather was born." Interesting. He made a note on his tablet. Someone filed a report claiming this structure was about to collapse and take half the neighborhood with it. You know anything about that? I'd been preparing for this moment since Vivian's first visit. The folder I handed him contained photos of recent renovation work, receipts for the new roof, documentation of electrical upgrades, everything a responsible property owner keeps. "Inspector Rodriguez, someone's been filing complaints about my property like it's their full-time job. All dismissed from what I understand." He flipped through my paperwork with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too many neighborhood feuds disguised as safety concerns. "Mr. Thornfield, this is the 12th complaint I've received about your property in the past year. Same complainant every time. That hit me like a punch to the gut. 12 complaints? I'd noticed the occasional inspector or city official, but 12 separate attempts to find violations? This wasn't harassment. It was a coordinated campaign designed to create a paper trail of problems where none existed." "All dismissed," Rodriguez continued, scanning his tablet. "Fire marshal found no violations. Environmental health found no contamination. Building inspector certified the structure as sound. Your complainant seems to have a lot of free time and even more imagination." This is where months of research at the county courthouse paid off. I'd learned that original deed restrictions often supersede later HOA rules. And more importantly, historical designation provides automatic protection against interference. While Vivian was busy playing inspector, I'd quietly filed for historical status based on the barn's underground railroad connections. "Inspector, I should mention this barn is under review for state historical designation. If approved, any interference would be a state-level violation." Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up like I'd just told him the barn was made of solid gold. That changes everything. Historical designation trumps local regulations, including HOA rules. You're looking at federal protection. He spent another hour examining every beam and joint with newfound respect. His verdict? "Remarkably well-maintained for its age. Whoever's been caring for this structure knows what they're doing." The crunch of expensive tires on gravel announced Vivian's arrival. She stepped out of her white Lexus wearing full battle armor, power suit, leather portfolio, and the expression of someone expecting total victory. "Inspector, I trust you found the serious violations I documented." Rodriguez looked at her with the flat stare of a man who'd reached his professional limit. "Ma'am, I found a well-maintained historic structure on private property. I also found evidence of systematic harassment through frivolous complaints. You might want to consult legal counsel before filing any more reports." Watching Vivian's face crumble as her enforcement strategy collapsed was worth every sleepless night I'd spent researching property law. But something in her eyes told me this was just the opening salvo of a much uglier war. After Rodriguez demolished her zoning complaint, Vivian escalated with the subtlety of a bulldozer in a flower garden. She organized a neighborhood safety committee meeting, complete with a PowerPoint presentation that would make a Fortune 500 CEO jealous. The community center reeked of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant as 24 neighbors shuffled into metal folding chairs, most clutching styrofoam cups and wearing the pained expressions of people who'd rather be home watching Netflix. Vivian's slideshow was a masterclass in visual manipulation. Photos of my barn shot from angles that made it look like the Bates Motel. Pictures of my friends visiting, Rex from the hardware store, my nephew Jake, guys from the VFW, but cropped and arranged to suggest some kind of criminal enterprise. She even managed to turn Carlos's work truck into evidence of gang activity by zooming in on his tattoos and emphasizing that he doesn't live in our community. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Vivian clicked through slides with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this performance in front of her bathroom mirror. "We must consider the safety implications," she announced, her voice dripping with the kind of manufactured concern that makes your teeth itch. "This structure attracts undesirable activities and individuals who don't share our community values." Translation: she didn't like the color of some of my visitors' skin. The woman had about as much subtlety as a brick through a window. Derek, her perpetually nervous husband, advanced to the next slide showing a proposed timeline. "The board recommends an emergency vote to declare the barn an immediate nuisance requiring removal within 30 days. That's when I stood up from the back row, my research folder thick as a phone book, and delivered the counterpunch I'd been preparing for weeks. "Before you vote away a piece of American history, maybe you'd like to know what's actually in that barn." My boots echoed on cheap linoleum as I walked to the front, spreading documents across the folding table like a lawyer presenting evidence. County records, historical society research, and photographs that told a story 2 centuries in the making. "That barn wasn't just built in 1823, I said, making eye contact with neighbors I'd known since they were kids. It was a station on the Underground Railroad. Those thick walls and hidden compartments, they weren't for storing grain, they were for hiding families escaping slavery." The room went silent except for that buzzing fluorescent and the sound of Vivian's world cracking apart. Mrs. Patterson, 83 years old and sharp as a tack, nodded slowly. "My grandmother used to tell stories. Said there were places along the river where people found freedom." I pulled out the Historical Society's preliminary findings. "The state's already reviewing this property for historical designation. Once approved, it's protected under federal law. No HOA in America can touch it." But here's where I dropped the real bombshell. While researching property law at the courthouse, I discovered that original deed restrictions often supersede later regulations, and historical designation creates an impenetrable legal shield against interference. 17 documented incidents of unauthorized property access, I continued, letting that number hang in the air like smoke. All recorded by security cameras, all potentially criminal depending on intent. You could see Vivian's brain calculating the legal implications. Her face shifted from corporate confidence to something approaching panic as she realized I hadn't been sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I'd been building a federal case. "Those were legitimate safety inspections," she started. "Conducted without board approval," interrupted Sarah Ivy, one of the newer board members whose engineering background made her less susceptible to Vivian's theatrics. "Vivian, when exactly did we authorize spending HOA funds on private investigators and property assessments?" The silence that followed was so complete you could hear Derek's nervous breathing from the front row. Board members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about how much they actually knew about their compliance coordinators' solo operations. After the meeting dissolved into confused murmurs, Sarah cornered me by the coffee table. "Dale, she's been operating like a one-woman government for months. Filing complaints without board knowledge, hiring contractors, making promises about future development opportunities." She glanced around, then whispered, "Derek works for Meridian Development. They've been acquiring properties all along the eastern boundary." That night, diving deep into property law websites until my eyes burned, I learned about adverse possession, a legal concept that lets developers claim abandoned or problematic properties through accumulated violations and neglect claims. Stack enough official complaints, create enough bureaucratic hassles, and suddenly a family's legacy becomes available for public improvement. The pieces were clicking together like a jigsaw puzzle from hell, and the picture they made looked exactly like a coordinated scheme to steal my grandfather's property through legal manipulation. Rex showed up the next morning with coffee and the expression of a man carrying bad news. "3 other families got identical letters this week," he said, settling into my kitchen chair like he weighed 1,000 pounds. "Same language, same threats, same impossible timeline. Dale, this isn't about your barn anymore. This is about something a whole lot bigger and uglier than any of us imagined. After her PowerPoint disaster, Vivian went nuclear with the precision of a woman who'd watched too many crime documentaries. She started filing police reports claiming suspicious activity at my barn. Apparently, me rebuilding a 1967 Mustang carburetor at 2 p.m. on a Saturday constituted a clear and present danger to suburban tranquility. Within a week, she'd organized volunteer safety patrols equipped with walkie-talkies, clipboards, and the kind of self-importance that would make TSA agents jealous. Picture middle-aged suburbanites in matching polo shirts conducting surveillance with the stealth of a marching band. If crime was actually happening in our neighborhood, these clowns would scare it away through sheer incompetence. The neighborhood Facebook group became her personal propaganda machine. Daily posts about declining property values appeared like clockwork, complete with ominous photos of my barn taken through telephoto lenses like she was documenting Sasquatch. The comment sections filled with manufactured outrage from accounts with suspiciously similar grammar errors. Derek, Jennifer_M_2021, and concerned resident all apparently attended the same remedial writing class. But the real escalation hit when Vivian started parking across from my driveway in her white Lexus, timing my visitors with the dedication of a federal surveillance team. She'd sit there for hours, AC running, vanilla air freshener so strong it made my sinuses burn from 50 yards away, making notes in that leather portfolio like she was building a case for the Supreme Court. That's when I called Sheriff Martinez directly through the Veterans Association. 20-year Army vet, local boy who understood the difference between legitimate concerns and suburban terrorism. We'd shared enough beer at VFW meetings to cut through bureaucratic nonsense. "Dale, I've been getting calls," Martinez said when I reached him at the station. His voice carried that weary tone of someone who'd dealt with too many neighborhood Napoleon complexes. Woman named Caldwell's filed 6 reports in 2 weeks. Suspicious vehicles, unusual activity, possible drug trafficking. "Sheriff, the most suspicious thing happening here is me trying to rebuild a carburetor without throwing tools at the wall." Martinez actually laughed. "Already figured that out. Ran background checks on your regular visitors. Rex Morrison, registered business owner, 30-year resident. Jake Thornfield, your nephew, spotless record. Carlos Mendez, licensed contractor, pays his taxes. Either you're running the world's most boring criminal enterprise or someone's jerking my chain." I shared my security footage showing Vivian's escalating surveillance behavior. 17 separate incidents of unauthorized property monitoring, visitor photography, and activity timing. Martinez reviewed it with the professional eye of someone who'd seen actual stalking cases. "This crosses the line into criminal harassment, Dale. Patterns documented, intents clear. I'm authorizing police protection for your family reunion next weekend." But here's where Martinez dropped a bombshell that rearranged everything I thought I knew about this situation. "Ran a deeper background check on your complainant's husband," he said, pulling up computer records. "Derek Caldwell submitted a commercial development proposal to the county 3 months ago. Project name, Meadowbrook Commons Shopping Complex. Funny thing, the proposal includes detailed surveys and soil samples from your property." The mini twist hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. While Vivian orchestrated her harassment campaign, Derek had been conducting unauthorized surveys of my land. They weren't just trying to annoy me into submission. They were gathering intelligence for a $2.3 million strip mall development that required my barn's demolition. "Sheriff, you're telling me this whole nightmare is about a shopping center?" Gets better. Meridian Development's proposal shows your property as essential for parking and access roads. Your refusal to sell blocks the entire project. We're talking about coordinated intimidation to force a property sale. While researching this development angle, I stumbled across something that changed the entire game. Filing false police reports constitutes criminal harassment in our state, and documented patterns can void HOA enforcement powers completely. More importantly, when multiple parties coordinate harassment campaigns, it becomes criminal conspiracy, a federal offense with serious jail time. The revelation hit me like finding the missing piece of a puzzle. Keep detailed logs of every interaction, because patterns prove intent in court, and proving intent transforms neighborhood bullies into federal defendants. Rex mobilized our informal resistance network. Mrs. Patterson's grandson offered legal research. The Historical Society president volunteered expert testimony. The VFW Legal Fund provided resources for what had become a full-scale property rights war. But sitting in my kitchen that night, watching Vivian's headlights sweep across my driveway for the 4th time since dinner, I realized this fight had evolved beyond neighbor disputes. This was about whether ordinary Americans could defend their family legacy against coordinated legal manipulation by people with deeper pockets and fewer principles. The coffee had turned cold hours ago, but underneath the bitter taste was something else. The metallic tang of pure determination. My grandfather hadn't survived the Depression and built this place with his bare hands just to see it bulldozed for a strip mall, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be the Thornfield who broke that chain. The war was escalating, but so was my resolve. The phone call that changed everything came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, jolting me awake from dreams about bulldozers and legal briefs. My nephew Jake's voice crackled through the old landline, breathless with the kind of excitement that comes from discovering buried treasure. "Uncle Dale, I found it. The smoking gun that blows Vivian's whole operation to pieces." I fumbled for my glasses and the kitchen light, my heart already racing. Jake worked part-time at the county assessor's office, and his obsession with details had been digging through filing cabinets like an archaeological expedition. Found what, exactly? The original 1952 deed restriction for Meadowbrook Estates. There's a clause specifically protecting agricultural structures existing prior to residential development. But Uncle Dale, here's the nuclear bomb. Guess who personally signed the acknowledgement when the HOA was formed 3 years ago? The pause stretched like a bridge cable under load. Harold Whitman, current HOA president. He knew about these protections and signed documents acknowledging they're legally binding. An hour later, Jake's folder hit my kitchen table with the weight of destiny. Page after page of photocopied documentation proving that every threatening letter, every fine, every enforcement action against my barn had violated deed restrictions that predated the Civil War. The musty smell of old paper mixed with fresh coffee as I absorbed the magnitude of what we'd uncovered. But the real revelation came buried on page 17, a legal definition of tortious interference with property rights. When someone knowingly violates established property protections for financial gain, they face triple damages plus mandatory attorney fees. In layman's terms, Vivian hadn't just been harassing me. She'd been committing federal crimes worth millions in potential penalties. The power dynamic didn't just shift, it inverted completely. For months, I'd been playing defense against HOA regulations that legally couldn't touch me. Now I held documentation proving they'd known these regulations were illegal from day one and proceeded anyway. Jake spread additional documents across the table, paper rustling like leaves in a storm. "Uncle Dale, this gets bigger. I found 8 other properties with identical protections. The Hendersons' greenhouse, Mrs. Murphy's chicken coop, that old workshop behind the Martinez place, all protected, all being targeted." The scope of the conspiracy crystallized like frost on morning windows. This wasn't about one stubborn property owner. This was a systematic scheme to circumvent historical preservation laws by pressuring protected families into voluntary compliance with regulations that had no legal authority. "Some people already caved," Jake continued, his voice carrying the weight of injustice. "The Kowalski farm, the Peterson place, they demolished protected structures because they didn't know about their rights. County records revealed the pattern clearly. Properties with deed protections were being systematically targeted through manufactured violations and harassment campaigns. Once families sold or demolished their historically protected structures, developers could argue the entire area had evolved beyond preservation status. Here's what made my blood pressure spike. Original deed restrictions don't just supersede HOA rules. They create constitutional protections that trigger federal oversight when violated. Property owners who prove coordinated harassment often receive not just monetary damages, but court orders dissolving offending boards and placing communities under federal monitoring. The transformation was complete. Instead of being a difficult neighbor fighting unreasonable rules, I was now a constitutional rights defender with federal law backing my case and documented proof of criminal conspiracy by elected officials. Wednesday morning's call to attorney Patricia Holbrook changed everything again. After reviewing Jake's documentation for 30 minutes, her assessment was devastating. "Mr. Thornfield, you don't have a property dispute. You have a federal civil rights violation worth potentially millions in damages." The files covering her conference table told a story that transcended neighborhood politics. This was about developers using HOA structures to circumvent constitutional protections, systematically targeting families with legally protected properties through coordinated campaigns that violated federal law. But Patricia's final revelation hit like lightning, striking twice in the same spot. Cross-referencing property records with development proposals revealed the ultimate truth. The parcels they've acquired through pressure tactics form a perfect corridor for shopping complex expansion. Your barn isn't just inconvenient. It's the keystone preventing a multi-million-dollar development. Driving home through afternoon shadows, I felt the weight of history settling on my shoulders. My grandfather's barn hadn't just survived 2 centuries of weather and change. It had become ground zero in a battle between constitutional property rights and corporate manipulation disguised as community governance. The taste of victory was still bitter with anticipation, but underneath that complexity was something pure and metallic, the flavor of justice finally within reach. Vivian Caldwell thought she was hunting a confused old man. She had no idea she'd just walked into the crosshairs of federal law enforcement. Thursday morning arrived with October air so crisp it made my sinuses tingle, and the kind of clarity that comes from finally seeing the whole chessboard. I called Sheriff Martinez first, my coffee still steaming like a locomotive while I spread Jake's documentation across the kitchen table like a general planning D-Day. "Sheriff, remember that harassment case? Turns out we've been hunting minnows when there's a whole shark in these waters." Martinez arrived within an hour, his patrol car crunching up my gravel driveway with the authority of someone who'd seen enough neighborhood disputes to recognize when one had metastasized into federal crime. He examined Jake's findings with the methodical attention of a surgeon, occasionally whistling low through his teeth like he was discovering new species of stupid. "Dale, this stopped being harassment about 6 violations ago. We're looking at conspiracy to violate federal property rights. If we can prove coordination between the HOA, development company, and any local officials, we're talking RICO charges that carry 20-year sentences." The plan that emerged over 3 hours of coffee and strategy was beautiful in its elegant simplicity. Let Vivian proceed with her threatened enforcement action while we turned her illegal entry attempt into a federally documented crime scene. Multiple law enforcement witnesses, professional recording equipment, and enough legal firepower to transform her harassment campaign into a criminal prosecution that would make headlines. "The secret is making them think they're winning," Martinez explained, sketching surveillance positions on my property map like a football coach diagramming the perfect play. "Let them commit every felony while we control the evidence collection." Attorney Patricia Holbrook joined our war council that afternoon, her briefcase packed with legal precedents that read like a constitutional law professor's wet dream. She'd taken the case pro bono because, as she put it with the predatory smile of someone who'd made corporate bullies cry, constitutional violations this blatant are career-making opportunities, and they need to be crushed so completely that other developers think twice before trying similar schemes. The legal strategy was 3-pronged and sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. File federal civil rights complaints citing discriminatory enforcement patterns. Demand the HOA produce all communications with development interests under discovery rules that would expose every dirty detail, and prepare countersuits for damages that would financially obliterate everyone involved in the conspiracy. "Here's something most people don't know," Patricia said, her pen scratching notes with the satisfaction of someone holding royal flush. "Federal civil rights violations carry mandatory attorney fee awards to winners. Prove they violated your constitutional rights and they pay for everything. Your legal costs, actual damages, and punitive awards that typically run into millions." But the most satisfying element was the trap we were choreographing. Patricia suggested allowing the HOA to proceed with their planned enforcement action, while Sheriff Martinez positioned deputies to witness the illegal entry with federal standard documentation. The goal? Catch Vivian and her hired muscle committing multiple felonies while body cameras captured every incriminating word and action. Rex mobilized our community resistance network with the efficiency of someone who'd organized half the town's charity drives and most of its successful political campaigns. 8 families discovered they possessed similar deed protections. The local newspaper committed to an investigative series on development pressure tactics, and the Historical Society launched a broader campaign for property rights awareness that was already attracting state attention. "People need to understand recording laws," Patricia warned during our strategy session, highlighting relevant statutes. "In our state, single-party consent means you can record any conversation you participate in, but for maximum legal impact, we want everything documented by law enforcement with proper chain of custody that will survive federal court scrutiny." The technical preparation took on the precision of a NASA launch. Rex arranged professional-grade security cameras with crystal-clear audio from his hardware store connections. Sheriff Martinez coordinated with the county prosecutor's office for immediate warrant processing if criminal activity occurred. Jake prepared legal documentation for instant service the moment trespassing began, but the most crucial element was psychological warfare. Vivian had scheduled her enforcement action for Tuesday morning, apparently believing midweek timing would minimize witnesses and community attention. She had no idea we'd transformed her stealth operation into a public demonstration of what happens when federal law enforcement protects constitutional rights. When private organizations conspire with commercial entities to violate property rights, Patricia noted, highlighting relevant RICO statutes, federal prosecutors get personally invested. These cases become career priorities because they involve fundamental constitutional protections. The irony was so perfect it tasted like aged bourbon. While Vivian planned a secret operation to steal my family's property, we were preparing to document federal crimes with enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved and bankrupt their entire operation. Monday night, sitting in my grandfather's old chair surrounded by 2 centuries of family history, I felt the weight of generations settling on my shoulders like a familiar coat. The barn stood silhouetted against moonlight, solid and defiant, ready to become ground zero in a battle that would determine whether constitutional property rights still meant anything in modern America. The taste of anticipation mixed with black coffee and the smell of aged wood drifting through windows. Tomorrow, Vivian Caldwell would learn the difference between bullying an isolated homeowner and attacking someone protected by federal law, constitutional rights, and a sheriff who'd read the Constitution more recently than she had. After our federal war council, Vivian went into full desperation mode with the tactical finesse of a rabid badger trapped in a phone booth. She called an emergency HOA board meeting for Sunday evening, accidentally forgetting to invite known Dale supporters like Sarah Ivy and Mrs. Patterson. The community center reeked of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant as she presented her case to a carefully curated audience of newer residents who'd swallowed her propaganda whole. The meeting minutes, which Sarah obtained through official channels the next morning, read like a manifesto written by someone who'd watched too many legal thrillers. The board voted to authorize immediate enforcement action against my barn, hire Alpine Security Services for compliance assistance, and establish a $15,000 emergency fund for community legal protection. What the minutes didn't mention was that Alpine Security was owned by Derek's brother-in-law, transforming HOA funds into a family money laundering operation. But Vivian's real desperation showed Tuesday morning when a fake utility worker appeared at my door like a discount spy movie extra. Guy in coveralls claiming to be from the gas company, insisting he needed emergency access to check for dangerous leaks near my barn. The overpowering smell of cheap aftershave mixed with nervous sweat gave him away before I noticed his utility truck had no company logos and license plates that didn't match the vehicle registration visible through his windshield. "I'll need to see your work order and company identification," I said, my phone already recording every stuttered word. He fumbled through empty pockets like a magician who'd forgotten his tricks, mumbled something about leaving paperwork in another truck, and drove away fast enough to leave rubber streaks on my gravel driveway. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Martinez confirmed the gas company had no scheduled inspections in our area and no record of that license plate, because it belonged to a 2015 Honda Civic, not a work truck. The woman was apparently hiring the intellectual equivalent of discount socks to conduct industrial espionage. Meanwhile, Vivian's social media campaign reached new heights of creative fiction. Posts appeared with the regularity of a Swiss watch, featuring heavily photoshopped images of my property, mysterious claims about environmental contamination, and testimonials from neighbors I'd never met describing imaginary incidents involving my structurally unsound death trap. The comment sections filled with sock puppet accounts, all sharing the same suspicious enthusiasm for property values and community safety. Apparently Derek had discovered copy-paste, but not subtlety. Thursday brought the nuclear option. Derek approached my former employer with what he called serious character concerns, trying to destroy my reputation in the tight-knit machinist community where word-of-mouth recommendations were everything. Unfortunately for him, my supervisor of 20 years knew exactly what kind of man I was, and exactly what kind of scam Derek was running. "Dale, some pencil neck in an expensive suit came asking about your mental stability and dangerous hoarding behavior," my old boss called to tell me, his voice carrying the kind of amusement reserved for watching idiots step on rakes. "I told him the only thing you ever hoarded was overtime hours and the respect of everyone who worked with you. Then I asked him to leave before I called security. But the real escalation arrived Thursday afternoon in the form of a legal threat that made previous communications look like birthday invitations. The HOA's attorney had crafted a masterpiece of manufactured urgency, claiming my barn violated 17 different safety codes, posed imminent and substantial danger to neighborhood children, and constituted an environmental hazard requiring immediate professional remediation. They demanded voluntary demolition within 48 hours, or the HOA would proceed with all available legal remedies, including forced destruction, property liens, and potential foreclosure proceedings. The certified mail sticker was still warm when I called Patricia Holbrook. Her reaction after reading the threats was like watching a shark smell blood in the water. "Dale, they just handed us a federal prosecution on a silver platter, threatening foreclosure based on fabricated violations, claiming authority they legally don't possess, and demanding property destruction while knowing about constitutional protections. This letter violates about 6 federal statutes simultaneously." Here's something most homeowners never learn until it's too late. Always demand written documentation for every HOA enforcement action, because most shortcuts they take are illegal, and illegal enforcement can void their entire authority over your property. While Vivian's public campaign reached fever pitch, we maintained complete radio silence about our federal documentation and law enforcement coordination. To outside observers, I appeared increasingly isolated and desperate, exactly the vulnerable image we wanted to project while preparing the legal equivalent of a nuclear strike. Sheriff Martinez's review of HOA documentation revealed violations that transformed their enforcement threats from civil annoyances into criminal prosecutions. Private security companies cannot legally enter property without court orders. HOA liens require due process procedures they'd ignored, and threatening foreclosure based on knowingly fabricated violations constitutes criminal fraud, carrying serious jail time. But the most revealing escalation came Friday evening, when a black sedan with tinted windows parked across from my driveway and remained there for 3 hours like a discount surveillance team. When Martinez ran the plates, the vehicle traced to a rental company with cash payment and identification so fake it wouldn't fool a convenience store clerk. Saturday night, staring through my kitchen window at the barn that had survived 2 centuries of genuine challenges, I tasted the metallic anticipation of approaching justice. Vivian had escalated from harassment into criminal intimidation, but she had no idea that every desperate measure was being documented by federal standards and building toward a reckoning that would expose her entire criminal enterprise. The trap was set, the bait taken, and Tuesday morning would bring the reckoning she'd been begging for. Monday morning brought Vivian's final gambit with all the subtlety of a freight train crashing through a library. She posted official-looking notices throughout the neighborhood announcing my barn would be secured for mandatory safety inspection within 24 hours, complete with fake letterhead and language suggesting she possessed county emergency powers. The notices even included a hotline for concerned residents to report additional violations, a number that, when Rex called it out of curiosity, went straight to Derek's personal cell phone. The enforcement team she'd assembled belonged in a comedy show about incompetent criminals. Tommy the Tank Morrison, Derek's brother-in-law, apparently believed that carrying bolt cutters and wearing an Alpine Security polo shirt granted him federal authority to break into private property. His 2 associates had the combined IQ of a bag of wet cement and about as much legal knowledge as a goldfish has about quantum physics. But Monday afternoon brought Vivian's most desperate play yet. A briefcase-carrying representative from Meridian Development who smiled like a used car salesman selling flood-damaged vehicles to hurricane victims. "Mr. Thornfield, I'm authorized to offer 150% of your property's assessed value for immediate sale," he announced, opening his briefcase like he was revealing the crown jewels. "All legal problems disappear, all HOA disputes vanish, and you walk away with enough money to buy something much nicer in a more appropriate community." The racial undertones weren't subtle, but the implied threats were crystal clear. When I politely declined his generous offer, his demeanor shifted from friendly salesman to something that belonged in a back alley. "That's unfortunate," he said, snapping his briefcase shut with the finality of a coffin lid. "Property disputes can become quite complicated, and complications have a way of affecting people's financial situations, their reputations, even their safety in unexpected ways." After he left, the bitter taste of anger mixed with black coffee created a combination strong enough to dissolve steel. These people weren't just stealing property. They were making threats that crossed every line between civil disputes and criminal intimidation. But here's where their psychological warfare revealed a fatal flaw. They assumed I was fighting this battle alone and defenseless. While they orchestrated their intimidation campaign, Our federal response team was positioning for a counterattack that would transform their enforcement action into a criminal prosecution that would make legal history. Sheriff Martinez had positioned unmarked surveillance vehicles with perfect sight lines to the barn, coordinated with the prosecutor's office for immediate warrant processing, and arranged for federal-grade recording equipment that would capture every syllable of their illegal entry attempt. The irony was beautiful. While Vivian planned a stealth operation, we'd turned her crime scene into a federally monitored demonstration of constitutional justice. Meanwhile, her smear campaign reached levels of desperate creativity that would impress fiction writers. Anonymous flyers appeared claiming my barn contained asbestos, lead paint, radioactive materials, and unspecified biological hazards that threatened the entire county's groundwater. Social media posts suggested I was threatening children, harboring criminal activity, and operating an environmental disaster requiring immediate federal intervention. The fake testimonials were particularly entertaining. According to Vivian's propaganda machine, my barn had caused mysterious respiratory illnesses, attracted packs of dangerous wildlife, and created traffic hazards that threatened emergency vehicle access. If half these claims were accurate, the CDC would have quarantined my property, and the National Guard would be conducting evacuations. But Monday evening brought the moment we'd been waiting for. Derek personally delivered what he called the final enforcement notice, while standing directly in front of security cameras that recorded every incriminating word. "This is your last chance, Thornfield. Tomorrow morning, we're taking possession of that structure for public safety. You can cooperate and maybe we'll discuss reasonable compensation, or you can resist and face the full legal consequences of obstructing legitimate community enforcement." Perfect. Derek had just provided federal quality recording of conspiracy to commit criminal trespass, theft of property, and violation of constitutional rights. Sometimes criminals are their own worst enemies. That night, surrounded by my grandfather's tools and the smell of aged wood mixed with machine oil, I felt 2 centuries of American craftsmanship preparing to witness justice finally arriving. Every hammer, every saw, every plane that had built something permanent would watch constitutional protections prove stronger than corporate greed and neighborhood tyranny. Tuesday morning would bring 3 idiots with bolt cutters expecting to find a defeated homeowner ready to surrender his family's legacy. Instead, they'd walk into Sheriff Martinez's carefully orchestrated federal crime scene with body cameras rolling and enough legal firepower to prosecute everyone involved for violations carrying serious prison time. The taste of approaching vindication was sweeter than victory and more satisfying than any revenge Vivian's small mind could have imagined. Constitutional rights were about to remind some very stupid people why they're called constitutional rights. Tuesday, 6:47 a.m. The bolt cutters screamed through my padlock like a metal banshee announcing Judgment Day, and that screech was the sweetest symphony I'd heard in months. Because Sheriff Martinez was crouched behind those barn doors, badge gleaming in the morning shadows, handcuffs ready, federal recording equipment capturing every felony second of what these idiots thought was their moment of victory. Steam fogged my kitchen window as I watched Tommy the Tank Morrison and his 2 brain-dead associates slice through my chain like they owned 2 centuries of American history. The morning air carried dew on aged wood, the sharp bite of cut metal, and the approaching scent of constitutional justice about to be served ice cold. "Entry achieved," Tommy announced into his walkie-talkie with the professional authority of someone whose legal education came from reality TV. "Beginning interior compliance assessment." What they couldn't see through those barn doors was Sheriff Martinez positioned behind a hand-hewn oak beam that had witnessed the Underground Railroad, Civil War, and 2 world wars, and was about to witness 3 felons walk face first into federal law enforcement. 30 seconds later, the sound echoing from that historic barn wasn't tools or demolition. It was pure, undiluted panic mixed with the beautiful music of criminal stupidity meeting constitutional reality. "County Sheriff, you're under arrest for breaking and entering." Martinez's voice cut through the morning air with the authority of federal law, followed immediately by the scrambling sounds of grown men realizing they'd just committed multiple felonies, while a sheriff's body camera documented their every desperate move. "What the hell? We have legal authorization!" Tommy's voice cracked like a pubescent teenager as handcuffs clicked into place with the finality of a prison door. "Authorization from who?" Martinez's response was calm as mountain granite and twice as immovable. "Because the HOA doesn't have constitutional authority to violate federal property protections." That's when Vivian's white Lexus came screaming into my driveway like she was racing to a Black Friday sale, expecting to supervise her triumphant property seizure. Instead, she found her enforcement team in federal custody, Sheriff Martinez reading Miranda rights and me stepping onto my porch with a folder thick enough to choke a horse. 6 months of documented evidence that would obliterate her entire criminal enterprise. "What is the meaning of this travesty?" Vivian shrieked, erupting from her SUV in full corporate battle armor, power suit, leather portfolio, and the expression of someone watching their carefully orchestrated crime scene collapse into federal prosecution. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal conspiracy, systematic harassment, and violation of federal civil rights," Martinez announced, approaching her with the methodical pace of justice that had been building momentum for months. The look on Vivian's face was worth every sleepless night. Shock, rage, and dawning horror as she realized her harassment campaign had just transformed into federal charges carrying serious prison time. Rex and Mrs. Patterson arrived as concerned neighbors responding to the commotion, but they were positioned witnesses ensuring this moment would be documented by multiple independent observers. The thunder of patrol car engines announced backup units sealing off the street, creating the kind of major law enforcement presence that transforms neighborhood disputes into evening news headlines. Within minutes, cars lined the street like a parade as residents emerged to witness their tyrannical HOA president being arrested for federal crimes. Sarah Ivy recorded everything from her porch. 3 more neighbors live-streamed to social media. The entire community was watching constitutional rights prove stronger than corporate bullying. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Vivian screamed as handcuffs clicked around her wrists with the sound of metal justice. "We have every legal right to enforce community standards." That's when I delivered the mic drop moment that 6 months of harassment had been building toward. "Vivian, you had the right to remain silent," I said, opening my folder to reveal documented evidence of everything. Every threat, every trespass, every federal violation. "Too bad you never had the intelligence to use it. Sheriff Martinez and federal investigators have been documenting your criminal conspiracy since day one. You didn't just break into my barn. You broke into a federal crime scene." The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug, leaving her looking like a deflated balloon at a child's birthday party. The woman who'd terrorized half the neighborhood with threats and intimidation was finally seeing what happens when constitutional rights meet professional law enforcement. Attorney Patricia Holbrook arrived with a convoy of legal firepower, restraining orders, federal civil rights complaints, and enough documentation to prosecute everyone involved. Local news crews were already setting up cameras as social media spread word about the arrests faster than wildfire. "This case represents systematic violation of constitutional property rights for commercial gain," Patricia announced to gathering reporters and cameras. "Federal prosecutors will pursue charges that carry significant prison time and financial penalties." Derek tried fleeing in his BMW, but found his escape route blocked by patrol cars and a crowd of neighbors who were finally witnessing the truth about the criminal conspiracy that had terrorized their community for months. Standing in my driveway, surrounded by the smell of morning coffee and the sound of handcuffs clicking, I felt 2 centuries of American property rights vindicated in the most public, permanent way possible. My grandfather's barn had survived the Underground Railroad, world wars, and economic disasters, and now it had defeated suburban tyranny with constitutional law and federal justice. The hunter had become the hunted, and justice had finally come home. 6 months later, the legal dust had settled like fresh snow on a peaceful winter morning, and the results exceeded even Patricia Holbrook's most optimistic predictions. Vivian Caldwell pleaded guilty to federal harassment charges and paid $47,000 in fines, restitution, and legal fees. Turns out, systematically violating constitutional rights carries a price tag steeper than her Lexus payments. Derek's development company settled the civil rights lawsuit for an undisclosed amount that Patricia described with a predatory smile as enough to endow a small college. The HOA board dissolved faster than cheap instant coffee, replaced by community-elected representatives who actually read constitutional law before making decisions. Harold Whitman resigned in disgrace after FBI investigators discovered his signed acknowledgments of deed protections, proving he'd knowingly participated in criminal conspiracy. The new board's first official act was issuing a formal apology and establishing a property rights protection fund for future legal challenges. But the most satisfying outcome was what happened to my grandfather's barn. The state fast-tracked its historical designation, officially recognizing its Underground Railroad heritage and protecting it under federal preservation laws. The bronze plaque mounted beside the massive oak doors reads, "Thornfield Station, 1823, protected site of American freedom." Running my fingers across those raised letters still gives me chills every morning when I unlock the workshop. That barn has become something my grandfather could never have imagined, the beating heart of a thriving community center. The Thornfield Community Workshop offers free woodworking classes for neighborhood kids, veterans dealing with PTSD, and anyone wanting to learn the satisfaction of building something permanent with their own hands. The rich smell of pine shavings mingles with coffee from our volunteer-run cafe, creating an atmosphere of creativity and healing that draws visitors from 3 counties. Rex expanded his hardware store empire, opening a second location specializing in historical preservation and property rights consulting. Our legal victory inspired property owners throughout the region to research their own deed protections, and Rex became the go-to expert for constitutional hardware needs. His new slogan, "Defending Property Rights One Screw at a Time," appears on billboards from here to the state capitol, complete with a photo of him holding a vintage hand plane. My health improved dramatically once the metallic taste of constant stress was replaced by the sweeter flavors of community coffee and shared purpose. The tension headaches disappeared, my sleep returned to normal, and my blood pressure dropped to levels that made my doctor ask what miracle cure I'd discovered. Turns out, constitutional justice is better medicine than anything you can get from a pharmacy. Mrs. Patterson's grandson Jake left his county assessor job to work full-time as a property rights paralegal, helping other families discover legal protections they never knew existed. The kid has a gift for translating complex deed language into plain English, and his client success rate would make big city attorneys jealous. The settlement money funded something that will outlast all of us, the Heritage Property Protection Scholarship for law students specializing in constitutional rights. Patricia Holbrook established the program at the State University, providing free legal assistance to homeowners facing similar pressure from developers and HOA tyrants. So far, the program has protected 63 historic properties and bankrupted 9 corrupt development schemes. Apparently, our case study has become required reading in constitutional law classes. But the ripple effects extended far beyond legal victories. The Historical Society received a federal grant for property rights education, creating traveling exhibits that teach Americans about deed protections and constitutional safeguards most people never discover until it's too late. The Veterans Administration adopted our case as a model for helping military families defend inherited property against bureaucratic harassment and corporate manipulation. Sheriff Martinez was promoted to chief deputy after federal prosecutors praised his investigation as a textbook example of protecting constitutional rights through professional law enforcement. He still stops by the workshop for coffee and to share war stories about other HOA cases he's investigating. Apparently, our victory inspired other harassment victims to start fighting back. The annual Property Rights Day celebration has become our community's signature event, drawing families from across the state to learn about constitutional protections while enjoying live bluegrass, historical demonstrations, and barbecue that makes people forget their troubles. Children who were once taught to fear my dangerous barn now compete to show their parents the birdhouses and toolboxes they've crafted in weekend classes. Even some of Vivian's former supporters approached me with sheepish apologies after learning about the criminal conspiracy they'd unknowingly supported. Fear and misinformation are powerful weapons, but truth and constitutional law prove stronger every time. Several families discovered they'd been pressured into unnecessary property modifications by the same illegal tactics used against me. The most meaningful transformation happened to the barn itself. Those thick walls that once sheltered families escaping slavery now protect a different kind of freedom, the liberty that comes from understanding your rights and having the courage to defend them. Every time I walk through those doors, I hear echoes of my grandfather's hammer mixing with children's laughter as they learn that building something permanent requires both skill and determination. Last month, a PBS documentary crew spent a week filming our workshop for a series about Americans defending constitutional rights against modern tyranny. The producer said our story captured something essential about the American spirit: ordinary people using law, community, and stubborn persistence to protect what matters most across generations. But the real victory isn't measured in legal settlements or media attention. It's in the young veterans who find peace working with their hands, neighbors who discovered their own historical protections, and children learning that building something beautiful takes time, patience, and respect for those who came before us. As I write this, sitting in my grandfather's worn leather chair while the workshop hums with productive energy, the smell of fresh sawdust mixes with coffee and the promise of projects yet to be built. the taste of victory has mellowed into something richer. The satisfaction of knowing constitutional rights still mean something when defended by people who refuse to be intimidated by corporate bullies or neighborhood tyrants. The battle for my barn saved more than one family's legacy. It proved that American property rights, properly defended, are stronger than any development scheme, HOA conspiracy, or attempt to steal what generations built with their own hands. Share your own HOA nightmare in the comments below. You might be surprised how many legal protections you actually have but never knew about. And don't forget to subscribe to Karen's Stories for more tales about ordinary Americans fighting back against petty tyranny and discovering that constitutional rights, when properly defended, always win in the end. Justice, it turns out, is a lot like quality woodworking. It requires the right tools, proper preparation, and the patience to build something that lasts forever.